I'm Dr. Sandra Brown. I'm an ophthalmologist in North Carolina. I have no financial conflicts of interest. I'd like to talk to you today about your doctor's path to acceptance of biologic eye drops. It works because they say it does. Part 1, how biologic eye drop manufacturers are like chameleons. So Rebecca and I were talking one day when Rebecca was driving somewhere. She had looked at a few preliminary versions of this talk. She said, "Your title slide is no good." I replied, "I've revised it like 3 times. And your cell phone reception sucks because you live in some boony place in Washington state. And by the way, sucks is not a curse word." So we brainstormed for a while. We threw some things back and forth. And she said, "Yeah, it's getting better. But you have to explain who they are." I said, "Right away?" She said, "Yes." It works because they say it does. Who is or are they? They includes the biologic eye drop manufacturers, key opinion leaders, trade journals, conference speakers, aka KOL, and social media. Let's talk about a drug which has gone through full FDA drug approval. From the lab to your eyes. And the first step takes many years and millions of dollars. And that is creating a foundation of science and preclinical data which allows the FDA to agree to allow the drug manufacturer to proceed with a clinical trial. And you can see the difference in size between the gray foundation of science and the orange clinical trial patients. We all hear about clinical trials. We get excited about new drugs, quote, in the pipeline, close quote. But what we never really think about, and we should, is all those geeky scientists toiling away in the lab, looking at cell cultures and rats. After the clinical trial is completed and the FDA has approved the drug, the clinical trial results are typically published in a peer-reviewed journal. Hallelujah. Many years, millions of dollars, fingers crossed, that blockbuster new drug is approved, and the manufacturer can start to brag about it. Let's briefly talk about FDA drug approval. The drug has to make the cut, and the FDA is known as being a safety paranoid organization. This is sometimes leveled at the FDA as an accusation. But because of this reputation for safety paranoia, once a drug is approved by the FDA, doctors don't tend to worry about safety in an overall sense. We need to know the contraindications and some specific issues. Eye drops do not generally have what are known as black box warnings, which means something so dire that if you do it anyway, such as giving a drug to a patient with a particular genetic liver condition and killing them, you'll be in terrible trouble. What comes next? Legal marketing. Legal marketing is on-label marketing. Legal marketing flows from key opinion leaders who write articles for trade journals who run ads, and sponsored symposia where key opinion leaders speak and discuss their personal experience with the new drug. We have to review again at this point briefly on-label versus off-label use. First of all, you have to have a label to have on-label or off-label use, and you don't get a label until you are FDA approved. In a funny technical sense, what the FDA is actually approving is the drug label, the paper document. On-label use means that the patient that you're prescribing the medication for is very similar to the clinical trial patients. And this can even be kind of nitpicky. Let's say the clinical trial patients were between the ages of 18 and 55. You prescribe it to somebody who's 57 years old. This is technically off-label use. Also, the disease that you're prescribing the drug for has to be identical to that of the clinical trial patients. Off-label use means any deviation from on-label use whatsoever. Well, as you can guess, there's a much larger potential patient population for off-label use. Therefore, once a drug is released out into the medical community, off-label use very rapidly will exceed on-label use, except for specific classes of medications, such as certain chemotherapy agents. Off-label use may include using the drug for the same general disease, but not exactly the same disease, such as dry eye and glaucoma. There may be different patient characteristics, Actually, some off-label use involves using a medication for a totally different disease. And for more information on this, see the videos On-Label, Off-Label, No-Label, Parts 1 and 2. Back to our pretty colored graph. We started with a foundation of science and clean data. We ran a successful clinical trial, which led to the publication of the clinical trial results in a peer-reviewed journal. Swiftly or simultaneously, the manufacturer began to spread the good word through key opinion leaders, trade journals, and symposia. Next, we have early adopter colleagues. The early adopter colleagues are those who are always willing to try something new without waiting for other people to try it first. There's typically a lot of chatter on professional listservs, and you'll also begin to see clinical studies of off-label use published in peer-reviewed journals. This is where the adventurous or out-of-options eye care providers can actually expand the known utility of a new drug. There's nothing bad about this, generally. And after the early adopter comes most eye care providers. So at the bottom, the base, we have the science. We then have on-label use and promotion. And above that, we have both on-label and off-label use and promotion. Those of you who have thought about using biologic eye drops, are using biologic eye drops, or have discussed them with your eye care provider who believes in them, may hear these words. In my clinical experience. I'm here to tell you that all doctors form opinions about treatments based on their personal clinical experience. Basically, the first time I prescribe any new drug to the first patient I prescribe it to, for me, this is a form of experiment. And by experimenting on my own patient population, which contains many patients which do not strictly match the type of patients that were in the clinical trial, I gain clinical experience. It's not just me, it's all of us. Doctors constantly revise their diagnosis and treatment paradigms through ongoing clinical experience because we are presented with new treatments, new diagnostic tools, and sometimes even brand new diseases. For example, the identification that Demodex mites are a frequent cause of recalcitrant blepharitis. So Snail asks, you experiment on your patients? But they're innocent children. To which I reply with a shrug, fairly often, many days. And this is how I became the goddess of pediatric blepharitis. What is GAMP? GAMP is prescribing behavior which is contained within that dashed rectangle up above. GAMP is the acronym for Generally Accepted Medical Practice. These are accepted standards of medical practice which are based on credible scientific evidence, published in peer-reviewed medical literature, which is generally recognized by the relevant medical community. And we're going to unpack that a little bit. We're talking about credible scientific evidence that has been published, not fake medical references. The publications are in peer-reviewed medical literature, which is recognized by the relevant medical community, which means it's recognized by eye care providers, not the regenerative medicine industry. Also, this is evidence which could be consistent with physician specialty society recommendations. And I haven't seen any specialty society in the eye care provider world which recommends the use of biologic eye drops. I really have to hope that they would never do that without first calling the FDA to discover whether they're doing something illegal. And this slide, which is a cute little green chameleon, will make sense very soon, in case you thought I had wandered very far from the topic of the title slide. Let's contrast an FDA-approved drug with the biologic eye drops. First, we start with the unproven claims of biologic eye drop manufacturers. It's a little pyramid. On top of that, you balance key opinion leaders. And key opinion leaders will write articles which are published in trade journals. The manufacturers will run ads in those trade journals. And they will also sponsor symposia where the key opinion leaders speak. Notice in this case, I've got key opinion leaders in red because without those KOLs, the manufacturers ain't got nothing. On top of that, you pile the early adopter colleagues, and chatter on professional listservs. And on top of that, you pile typical eye care providers. I say typical because we're talking about someone who is not an early adopter and usually not subspecialized, or at least not knowledgeably subspecialized. Let's get away from those colored bars for just a minute and ask this question. Why does a doctor try something new? I've got a list of reasons in decreasing font size. Big font, published report of FDA clinical trial in a peer-reviewed journal. Next, your doctor learned about it at a meeting. Below that, they heard about it from their colleagues, either in the office, at regional meetings, a national meeting, or on a listserv. And then finally, in small print at the bottom, read about it in a trade journal. Actually, really, this is why your doctor tries something new. Big font, they heard about it from their colleagues. They read about it in a trade journal, which is a great opportunity for a manufacturer to provide repeat exposure. Smaller font, they learned about it at a meeting. And very smallest font of all, they read about it in a published report of an FDA clinical trial in a peer-reviewed journal. This is 5% of the information your eye care provider sees and hears about a new drug. That's why I've made those graphics so small. This is 95% of the information your eye care provider sees and hears about a new drug. Just look at those graphics quickly without reading too much of the details, and you'll see how similar they appear. This is what I mean by chameleon marketing. Chameleon marketing summarized. If it's in a trade journal, it's just like all the other drugs advertised in a trade journal, FDA approved or over-the-counter monograph compliant. If a famous key opinion leader is talking about it, it's just like all the other drugs they talk about, FDA approved. If a manufacturer exhibits at a national meeting, they are just like all the other exhibitors, vetted by the meeting organizers and not breaking federal law. The result of chameleon marketing is that your eye care provider has equal confidence in both an FDA-approved prescription eye drop and a scam pharma biologic eye drop. Biologic eye drops follow the red font to the key opinion leaders. And yes, just to trip you up, I switched sides on these graphics. On the left, we have biologic eye drops. On the right, the Food and Drug Administration. If the BED manufacturers did not have key opinion leaders, they would not be able to spread their message. About all they'd be able to do would be to run ads in the trade journals. And although this is an opportunity for repeat exposure, the ad by itself is not going to be nearly as persuasive as the kind words of a respected colleague. Rebecca always likes the slide that makes the great web page graphic, and I think this is it. On the left, we have the FDA drug approval process, which rests on a foundation of science and clean data. On the right, we have the unproven claims of biologic eye drops manufacturers, which succeeds through chameleon marketing. And do those KOLs have a financial conflict of interest? Oh, surely not. Dear colleagues, be smart. Call the FDA about novel eye drops from unknown drug manufacturers. Because what you don't know might shock you. Like, the company and the KOLs lied about its FDA approval. I mean, who does that? After listening to this talk, Snail let me know. He wants to retract his snarky comment about me experimenting on children. But I reassured him, yes, it's true the chameleon is cute, but you're not being replaced. Thank you for listening.